At 2 in the morning, the Omnigen Corporation headquarters was a ghost ship sailing through a sea of darkness. By day, it was a humming hive of brilliance, a glass and steel cathedral where some of the brightest minds in biotechnology worked to decode the very building blocks of life. By night, it fell silent, leaving only the low thrum of the server farms in the basement and the solitary rhythmic swish of a mop on polished marble floors. This was Elena Petrova's world. She moved through the vast, empty spaces with a quiet efficiency that bordered on invisibility. To the researchers and executives who hurried past her during the shift change, she was just a part of the building's infrastructure, a stooped figure in a plain gray uniform, no more worthy of a second glance than a fire extinguisher or a potted plant. They didn't see the intelligence in her sharp, gray eyes or the methodical precision in her work. They didn't notice how she cleaned around the complex equations on a researcher's whiteboard with the care of a museum curator, or how she would gently write a fallen family photograph on a cluttered desk. She was the ghost who reset the stage, wiping away the chaos of one day to prepare for the genius of the next. On this particular night, the silence was broken by the sharp, self-important footsteps of Mark Jensen, the night operations supervisor. He was a man whose ambition vastly outstripped his authority, a man who wore his middle management title like a general's uniform. His suit was a little too tight. His tie was knotted with aggressive neatness, and he walked the empty halls not to ensure they were secure, but to remind himself that he was in charge of something. He saw the world as a ladder, and he was determined to plant his foot on anyone below him. Helena was at the very bottom. Petrova, his voice echoed across the cavernous main atrium, sharp and jarring. My office, now. In his mind, he had an office, in reality. It was a small, glass-walled cubicle near the loading dock. Elena finished her pass with the buffer, parked it neatly against a wall, and walked towards him, her expression calm and unreadable. He didn't wait for her to arrive, instead pointing a sharp finger towards the workstation of Dr. Alistair Arris, Omnigen's lead geneticist and a man famous for his brilliant but chaotic habits. Explain this, Mark demanded. Elena looked at the desk. There were a few dark brown drops of dried coffee near a stack of printouts. The stain was tiny, almost unnoticeable amidst the usual creative clutter of books and papers. Sir, I have not yet cleaned this section, she explained, her voice soft with a faint, unplaceable Eastern European accent. I was waiting for the sealant on the West Corridor floor to dry. Mark scoffed, a theatrical sound of disbelief. He had found his infraction for the night. A passing security guard slowed his pace, and Mark, sensing an audience, raised his voice. Excuses, that's all I ever hear from your department. Do you have any idea what happens at this desk, Elena? This is Dr. Aris. The man is personally responsible for a patent portfolio worth more than your entire country. These documents, he said, tapping a finger on a generic, text-filled printout, could be worth millions, and you've allowed this filth to contaminate the workspace? The accusation was so absurd it was almost comical, but there was no humor in Mark's eyes. There was only the petty, vindictive pleasure of a small man exercising his small power. I can assure you, sir, nothing has been contaminated, Helena said, her voice remaining level. Don't talk back to me, he snapped. I don't need your assurances. I need competence. I need you to understand that this isn't just an office building. This is the future of medicine, and you are treating it like a public bus station. He pulled out a small notepad. I am writing you up for this. A formal reprimand for dereliction of duty. Maybe that will finally get your attention. He was trying to provoke a reaction. He wanted tears, or anger, or pleading. It would validate his authority. He got none of it. Elena Petrova's face became a calm, stoic mask. The hurt was there, visible only as a slight dimming in her intelligent gray eyes. But her dignity was an fortress he could not breach. She simply stood there, absorbing the tirade without flinching. When he was finished, she gave a single, curt nod. I understand, sir, she said. I will clean it immediately. Her quiet compliance infuriated him more than any argument could have. He had won the exchange, but he felt strangely defeated, with a final dismissive glare. He turned and strode away, feeling the satisfying illusion of his own importance. Elena watched him go. Then, she turned back to the desk. She took out a special cleaning cloth and a small bottle of solution, and with the delicate, precise movements of a surgeon, she began to lift the tiny brown stain from the desk's surface. As she worked, her eyes drifted over the equations and diagrams scribbled across Dr. Eris's whiteboard. For a fleeting second, the stoic mask on her face dissolved. It was replaced by a flicker of intense, analytical concentration, a deep and forgotten knowledge stirring in her eyes as she traced the complex logic of the diagrams. It was a look that did not belong on the face of a cleaner. It was the look of a master craftsman recognizing the work of another. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. She was once again Elena Petrova, the invisible woman, finishing her work in the dead of night, the unjust reprimand, a fresh, stinging wound that no one else would ever see. The first rays of dawn were painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gray as Elena Petrova's shift ended. She walked out of the gleaming, silent Omnigen tower and into a city that was just beginning to stir. The humiliation of Mark Jensen's reprimand clung to her like a foul scent. A stark reminder of her place in this new world, she boarded a public bus, her face a neutral mask among the throng of other early risers, nurses, construction workers, baristas, all heading toward lives of visible purpose, while hers remained buried in the shadows. Her apartment was in a tired, brick building on a street that had long ago given up any pretense of grandeur. The anonymity of it was a shield inside. Her small flat was Spartan, but, like her work, impeccably clean and ordered. There were no photographs on the walls, no sentimental knickknacks on the shelves. There was nothing that could tie Elena Petrova to the woman she used to be. Nothing, except for the machine in the corner of the living room. It was a custom-built computer, a monolithic black tower whose components were far too powerful and expensive for a cleaner's meager salary. Its screen was dark. For years, it had remained dormant, a sleeping dragon. It was the only ghost of her past she had allowed herself to keep, a constant, silent reminder of both her power and her exile. She made a simple cup of black tea, the ritual a small comfort, as she sat at her small kitchen table. The stinging memory of Mark Jensen's voice, unacceptable sloppiness, dereliction of duty echoed in her mind. It wasn't his anger that hurt, it was the profound, crushing irony. It was the powerlessness, the same terrifying powerlessness she had felt in the last frantic days before her old life had burned to the ground. The steam from the tea swirled, and the drab apartment kitchen dissolved into the frantic, vibrant energy of a different life, a different city, Moscow. She was not Elena Petrova, the cleaner. She was Dr. Elena Voronina, a name spoken with reverence in the hushed, rarefied world of global cybersecurity. Her colleagues at the prestigious Zaitsev Security Group had nicknamed her Pryacha the Weaver for her uncanny ability to see the invisible threads connecting disparate lines of code, to find the single, flawed knot in an otherwise perfect digital tapestry, and to unravel the most complex cyber attacks in the world. In her memories, she was not in a gray uniform, but in a sharp business suit, commanding a team of brilliant young analysts. Her mind alight, her fingers flying across a keyboard as she navigated the labyrinthine architecture of a protected network. She remembered the thrill of the hunt, the respect in her colleagues' eyes, the deep satisfaction of bringing order to digital chaos. And she remembered the case that had ended it all. It had started as a series of sophisticated but seemingly standard ransomware attacks on European financial institutions. But Elena, the Weaver, saw something others missed. The attacks were clumsy in places, almost intentionally so. The ransom demands were a sideshow. This wasn't about money. It was about testing defenses, mapping network topographies, and probing for weaknesses in critical infrastructure. It was reconnaissance on a massive scale. As she dug deeper, she found it a tiny, recurring fragment of code, a digital fingerprint hidden within the malware's polymorphic engine, a stylized skull with a serpent coiled through its eye sockets. The signature of Koche, a shadowy state-sponsored hacker collective rumored to be untouchable. But Elena kept digging, and she found the thread that led from the hackers to a shell corporation. And from that corporation to a high-ranking, powerful official within her own government. She had found the real conspiracy. Koche was not a rogue element. It was a deniable cyber weapon, being used to prepare for a new kind of war. She prepared her report, a meticulously documented exposé that would have been the crowning achievement of her career. But her mentor, a wise, weary old professor named Dmitri, had looked at her with terrified eyes. "You cannot publish this, Elena," he had pleaded. "These are not men who can be fought with data. This report is not evidence. It is your death warrant." She hadn't listened, not at first. Then the warnings began. A near-fatal accident on the Moscow Ring Road when her car's brakes mysteriously failed. A critical data file on her home server, a file she had protected with her own unbreakable encryption, was wiped clean, replaced only with the skull and serpent symbol. They were in her life. They were demonstrating their reach. They were telling her that no digital fortress she could build would keep her safe. The choice became brutally simple: her principles, or her life. She used her skills one last time, not for a client, but for herself, in a frantic, sleepless 72-hour period. She became a ghost. She digitally immolated Dr. Elena Voronina, wiping her records, creating false trails, and burying her identity under layers of untraceable code. Then she built a new one from scratch: Elena Petrova, a woman with a fabricated, unremarkable past, a political refugee seeking asylum in America. She left in the middle of the night with a single bag, her powerful laptop, and the ghosts of a life she could never reclaim. Back in her small, quiet apartment, the tea had gone cold. Elena shuddered, the memory fading. She looked at her hands, the hands that now held mops and cleaning rags, the hands that had once waged silent wars. Mark Jensen had called her incompetent. He had no idea he was speaking to a woman whose only crime had been to be too competent. A woman who had to trade a life of brilliance for a life of silence, just to survive. Her invisibility was not a misfortune. It was a shield she had forged herself, at an unimaginable cost. The sun was high in the sky when OmniGen roared back to life. The quiet, sterile halls of the night were transformed into bustling arteries of intellectual commerce. Researchers in crisp lab coats hurried through the corridors, coffee cups in hand, their minds already wrestling with complex genetic sequences. The air, once still, now crackled with energy, ambition, and the low hum of a billion-dollar enterprise at the peak of its power. Dr. Alistair Ellis, a man whose genius was matched only by his legendary untidiness, arrived at his workstation. He noticed his desk was, for once, immaculately clean. The coffee stain from yesterday was gone. He grumbled under his breath about cleaners moving his papers, completely oblivious to the small act of grace that had been performed there hours earlier. He sat down, typed in his credentials, and attempted to access the central server for Project Chimera. He was expecting to see petabytes of genomic data, the intricate digital architecture of his life's work. Instead, his screen went black. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, an image resolved itself in the center of the monitor, glowing with a sickly green light. It was a stylized skull, angular and menacing, a serpent, intricately detailed, was coiled through its empty eye sockets, its forked tongue flicking out as if to taste the air. Dr. Ellis stared at it, confused. What in the world? Before he could finish the thought, the screen of the researcher next to him blinked and displayed the same terrifying symbol. Then another, and another, like a digital plague. The infection spread through the lab in seconds. A wave of confused murmurs rippled through the room, quickly escalating into shouts of alarm. The digital heartbeat of Project Chimera had flatlined. The news hit the IT Security Operations Center like a physical blow. The SOC, a glass-walled room filled with monitors and known colloquially as the Nerve Center, was the digital fortress of OmniGen. Commanded by David Chen, David was a cybersecurity prodigy, a man with a seven-figure salary and an ego to match, who believed there was no system he couldn't crack and no threat he couldn't neutralize. "What do you mean? You're locked out," he demanded, shoving a junior analyst out of a chair and taking control of the master console. "Isolate the Chimera server from the network. Now, we can't, sir," the analyst stammered. "We've lost root access. Everything is unresponsive." David's fingers flew across the keyboard, his face a mask of intense concentration. He ran diagnostics, he deployed countermeasures, he attempted to force a connection to the off-site, supposedly untouchable backups. Nothing. Every command he issued was either ignored or bounced back with a system error. It was like throwing rocks at a granite fortress. The encryption was seamless, elegant, and utterly impenetrable. It wasn't the clumsy work of a common ransomware gang. This was art, and it was malicious. It was. David Chen, the man who was always the smartest person in the room, felt a cold knot of dread form in his stomach. He was out of his depth. This was not a problem he could solve. And then, the final, devastating blow landed. On every screen in the lab, in the SOC, and on every terminal connected to the OmniGen network, a new element appeared beneath the skull and serpent icon. It was a digital countdown timer, its red numbers stark and unforgiving. 23:59:59. It began to tick down, second by agonizing second. The message was brutally, terrifyingly clear. This wasn't a negotiation for ransom. This was an execution. They had less than 24 hours until years of priceless, revolutionary research. The entire future of OmniGen would be permanently erased. The silent scream of the locked machines had finally silenced the entire corporation. David Chen picked up his phone, his hand trembling slightly. To make the call he never thought he'd have to make. He had to tell the CEO that the fortress had been breached, and that the enemy was already inside the throne room. The countdown had begun. The main boardroom at OmniGen was on the 50th floor, a glass-walled sanctuary of power with a panoramic view of the sprawling city below. It was a room designed to inspire confidence, to project an image of untouchable success. But on this day, the opulent room was not a sanctuary, it was a pressure cooker. The billion-dollar view was ignored, as every eye in the room was fixed on the large monitor at the far end, where the skull and serpent symbol glowed malevolently above its ticking clock of doom. At the head of the long-polished mahogany table sat CEO Robert Harrington, a man whose silver hair and charismatic command had graced the covers of business magazines. Today, his famous composure was a thin, brittle veneer stretched over a core of pure panic. To his right sat Dr. Lena Hansen, the brilliant head of research and development, her face pale with the sick dread of a parent watching her child slip away. Her life's work, Project Chimera, was trapped behind that cryptic symbol. And at the head of the table stood David Chen, the head of IT, looking disheveled and defeated. He was delivering a report that was nothing short of a eulogy. "The encryption isn't a single algorithm," David said, his voice strained, gesturing helplessly at the screen. "It's a nested matrix of several, each one triggering the next. It's beyond military grade. It's theoretical. I've never seen anything like it." "What about the backups?" Harrington demanded, his voice dangerously low. "Compromised," David admitted, the word tasting like acid. It was a two-pronged attack. The virus that encrypted the main server also deployed a logic bomb to our off-site backups. It's not encrypting them, it's actively corrupting the data blocks at a randomized rate. Restoring from them is impossible. By the time the process finished, we'd have nothing but digital sludge. A wave of groans went through the assembled board members. "Trace the source," one of them asked, a retired general with a face like a bulldog. "A ghost," David said, shaking his head. The attack was routed through a daisy chain of a dozen hijacked servers in non-extradition countries, terminating in a satellite uplink that went dark the second the virus was deployed. They are untraceable. Robert Harrington stood up and walked to the window, his back to the room. "Let me be clear about the stakes here," he said, his voice tight with suppressed fury. "As you know, our merger with Biocorp is scheduled to be finalized next week. That deal is valued at $12 billion. Project Chimera is the centerpiece of that valuation. Without that data, the merger is dead." He turned back to face them. "When news of this gets out, our stock will be worthless by the end of the week. We will face a deluge of shareholder lawsuits that will bankrupt us twice over. But more than that," he said, his gaze falling on Dr. Hansen. "Chimera is a new class of gene-editing technology that has the potential to eradicate hereditary diseases like Huntington's and cystic fibrosis. If that data is wiped, it will set medical science back a decade." The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. "So what are our options?" another board member asked. "Can we pay them? Is there a ransom?" "There's no demand," David said miserably. "No contact information, no Bitcoin wallet. This isn't about money. This is about destruction." Lingering near the door, trying to look essential, was Mark Jensen. He had used the security crisis as a pretext to get into the war room, hoping to absorb some importance by proximity. Seeing a lull, he stepped forward. "Why, sirs," he began, his voice sounding reedy and out of place. "I've initiated a full review of all night shift access logs and security protocols. We are interviewing all subordinate staff to—" But Harrington cut him off with a withering glare that could have melted steel. "Thank you, Mark," the CEO said, his voice dripping with ice. "Your diligence in this matter is noted." It was a brutal, public dismissal. Mark shrank back towards the wall, his face burning with humiliation, his utter irrelevance in this crisis laid bare for all to see. He was a man who policed coffee stains while the entire building was burning down around him. The hours crawled by. High-priced consultants were conferenced in, only to confess they were as baffled as Omnigen's own team. Tense calls were made to government agencies, who could offer sympathy but no immediate solutions. The men and women in the room, titans of industry and science, were reduced to helpless spectators, their power, their wealth, and their brilliance rendered utterly useless. They were all just watching the clock. As evening fell, casting long shadows across the city, the mood in the boardroom curdled from panicked action to grim, funereal despair. The timer on the screen glowed with an obscene cheerfulness. 084716. Hope was a dying ember. They were 8 hours from ruin, and they had no idea that the one person on Earth who held the key was. At that very moment, swiping her low-level security badge to begin her shift, Elena Petrova swiped her security badge and entered the service corridor of Omnigen at 10 p.m., her usual start time, but the moment the heavy door clicked shut behind her, she knew something was deeply wrong. The building was supposed to be winding down, a quiet, sleeping giant, instead. It was on high alert, lights blazed in every office. The air, usually still and cool, hummed with a frantic, nervous energy. She saw executives in shirt sleeves, their ties loosened, hurrying down hallways with grim faces. She saw IT technicians, their eyes wide and bloodshot, huddled around laptops like battlefield medics. This was not the orderly world she meticulously cleaned each night. This was chaos. Pushing her cleaning cart ahead of her, she emerged into the main atrium. A massive, temporary monitor had been set up, connected to the corporate network. On its screen, glowing with a menacing green light, was an image that made Elena's heart stop cold. The skull, the serpent. Her breath caught in her throat. Her hand tightened on the handle of her cart until her knuckles were white. The world around her seemed to warp and fade, the sounds of the panicked employees dissolving into a distant roar. It couldn't be. Not here. Not after all these years. It was the digital sigil of Koshai. It was the ghost that had haunted her dreams, the symbol of the life she had been forced to bury. The past she had run from for half a decade had just announced its arrival in the heart of her sanctuary. Her training, buried under years of routine and silence, roared back to life. She wasn't just seeing a symbol. She was reading a declaration of war. She knew what this meant. She knew their methods, their philosophy. They were not thieves. They were nihilists. They did not want money. They wanted to watch things burn. She saw a young IT analyst slumped in a chair nearby, staring at his own laptop with a look of utter defeat. The same skull and serpent stared back at him. Elena abandoned her cart and approached him, her mind racing. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft but urgent. "That symbol. The attack vector is not what you think it is." The young man looked up, his eyes bleary from staring at code for hours. He saw her gray cleaner's uniform in his face, already strained with stress, hardened with annoyance. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this is a Level 1 security crisis," he said dismissively. Turning back to his screen, "This is a restricted area. Please, we don't have time for this." He had erased her. She was just the help, a distraction. A hot surge of frustration, something she hadn't felt in years, washed over Elena. She looked at the main monitor again and focused on the countdown clock in the corner, 07-1244. The number meant more to her than to anyone else in this building. Koshé were masters of psychological warfare. That timer wasn't just for pressure. It was a deadline for a secondary protocol. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that when that timer hit a specific, hidden tripwire long before it reached zero, an automated process would begin that would make recovery impossible. These people thought they had 7 hours. In reality, they might only have 1. She couldn't get through to the soldiers. She needed to speak to an officer. A grim, terrible irony dawned on her. In this entire billion-dollar corporation, there was only one person in a position of management who knew her name, who would even recognize her face. The one man she would rather never speak to again. Mark Jensen. Her mission changed. The floors could wait. The trash could overflow. She turned from the dismissive IT tech, leaving her cleaning cart behind an act of rebellion so contrary to her nature that it felt like shedding a skin. She scanned the chaotic atrium, her eyes sharp and analytical. She was no longer a cleaner. She was Dr. Voronina on the hunt. She spotted him near the entrance to the executive wing, barking useless orders about building security into a walkie-talkie, trying desperately to look relevant in a crisis that was far beyond his comprehension. Elena set her jaw, her posture straightening with a forgotten authority. She began to walk toward him, her steps measured and deliberate. The last time they had spoken, he had been the one in command. This time would be very different. Mark Jensen stood near the executive elevators, barking orders into his walkie-talkie with an air of theatrical importance. "I want a full security sweep of the sub-level corridors. Understood, no one gets in or out without my authorization." He was directing a bored-looking security guard to check a door that was already sealed by a magnetic lock. He saw Elena approaching, her cleaning cart nowhere in sight, and his face, already tight with stress, hardened into a scowl of annoyance. "Petrova, what in God's name do you think you're doing wandering around?" he snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "There is a crisis underway. Your duties do not stop. Get back to your sector before I write you up for insubordination." Elena did not stop. She walked right up to him, her calm, steady gaze meeting his angry one without a trace of fear. "Mr. Jensen," she said, her voice low and firm, all trace of the timid cleaner gone. "You need to listen to me. The symbol on your screens, I know what it is." Mark let out a short, incredulous laugh. You know what it is. Let me guess. You saw it in a movie once. Don't waste my time with your fantasies. Elena, I am extremely busy." "This is not a fantasy," she said, her voice dropping even lower, taking on an edge of cold, hard authority that momentarily stunned him into silence. "Your IT team is trying to break the encryption on the main server. They are failing because they are designed to fail. The encryption is a diversion. It is a noisy, beautiful piece of work designed to occupy your best minds while the real damage is done elsewhere." Mark stared at her, thrown off balance by her tone and the technical jargon. "Damage elsewhere? What are you talking about?" I am talking about Koshé, she said, naming the ghost. That is their signature. They always work in two-man teams, the artist, who creates the public-facing attack, and the demolition man, who works in the shadows, while your team has been fighting the artist. The demolition man has been killing your company. She took a small step closer, her gray eyes pinning him in place. You need to check your off-site backups. I don't mean check their status, I mean a deep-level analysis of the data blocks. I will wager my life that they are not encrypted. They are being systematically destroyed by a targeted data-shredding worm right now. The specificity of the attack, the utter confidence with which she spoke, finally pierced Mark's thick wall of condescending arrogance. A cold serpent of fear uncoiled in his gut. The woman standing before him was not the simple cleaner he had humiliated. He didn't know what she was, but she spoke with the absolute certainty of an expert. Fumbling for his smartphone, his hands shaking, he bypassed the walkie-talkie and speed-dialed David Chen in the war room. David, he yelped into the phone, his voice high-pitched with a panic he could no longer conceal. The backups, the off-site storage. What is the real-time status? Are they secure? He listened, his face draining of all color. The confident swagger evaporated, replaced by a slack-jawed horror. What do you mean you're seeing cascading block-level corruption? Since when? Hours ago. Why the hell wasn't that the priority? He listened for another moment, his eyes wide and glassy, then hung up without saying goodbye. He turned to face Elena. The world had just been reconfigured before his very eyes. The woman in the simple gray uniform held all the knowledge. He, the supervisor, held nothing. She was the expert, he was the fool. He saw the future of the company and his own career, collapsing into a black hole of his own ignorance. He stumbled toward her, his carefully constructed facade of authority completely disintegrated. "How?" he stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. "How did you know that?" Elena simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. She offered no explanation. "No, I told you so." She just waited, letting the full weight of his catastrophic failure crush him. And finally Mark Jensen broke. "Please," he begged, the word ragged and alien in his mouth. He reached out a hand as if to grab her arm, then let it fall uselessly to his side. "You have to help us." He said the corruption is accelerating. It's almost complete. The whole company. Years of work. It's all going to be gone. His eyes, now wide with terror and a dawning, desperate respect, pleaded with her, "What do we do? Please, just tell us what to do." The arrogant supervisor was gone, replaced by a terrified man begging for help from the invisible woman he had tried so hard to crush less than 24 hours earlier. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been inverted, shattered, and remade. And Elena Petrova, the cleaner, now held the fate of Omnigen in her steady, capable hands. Elena looked down at the desperate, pleading face of the man who had humiliated her. In his eyes, she saw the reflection of the entire, helpless corporation. She gave a single, sharp nod. "Take me to your war room," she commanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Now." Mark Jensen, his authority completely gone, simply obeyed. He turned and practically ran towards the executive wing, with Elena following calmly in his wake. Employees milling in the hallways stared at the bizarre spectacle, the panicked supervisor being led with grim purpose by the night shift cleaner. When Mark burst into the 50th floor boardroom, every head snapped up. The room was a tomb of despair. CEO Robert Harrington looked up, his face grim. Dr. Hansen looked as if she were attending a funeral. David Chen, the IT prodigy, was staring blankly at a screen of incomprehensible, scrolling code. "Mark, what is the meaning of this?" Harrington demanded, his voice ragged. "We do not have time for—" His voice trailed off as he saw Elena step into the room behind Mark, her gray uniform a stark anomaly in the world of expensive suits and high-stakes panic. "Sir," Mark stammered, gesturing wildly at Elena, "she knows. She knew about the backups. She knows who they are." David Chen let out a bitter, exhausted laugh. "Oh, for God's sake, Mark, did you bring the janitor in to offer a prayer? Get her out of here." Elena ignored them all. Her eyes were locked on the main screen, absorbing the data, the countdown clock, the elegant, malevolent signature of her old enemy. She walked past the CEO, past the board members, and stopped directly behind David Chen at the main console. "You are trying to break the encryption on the primary server while simultaneously trying to halt the corruption on the backup," she said. It wasn't a question. "You are fighting a war on two fronts. It is why you are losing." David spun around in his chair to confront her, but the words died in his throat. He saw no cleaner. He saw a woman whose eyes held an unnerving, analytical fire, a woman who spoke with the absolute certainty of a field marshal. "Give me a command line interface with root access to your core firewall protocols," Elena commanded, her voice crisp and clear. "And patch in a live feed of the data shredder's progress on the backup server. I need to see its refresh rate." The sheer technical authority in her voice was staggering. David looked at the CEO, who, for the first time in hours, saw a flicker of something other than despair. Harrington gave a curt nod. "Do it," he said. "Do what she says." Hesitantly. David slid his chair aside. Elena sat down. The room fell into a dead silence. The only sound the frantic clicking of keys as Elena's fingers began to move across the keyboard. It was not a frantic, panicked typing. It was a fluid, masterful dance. A conversation in a language only she and her enemy understood. The war room, filled with the most powerful people at Omnigen, became her stage. "They are masters of misdirection," she said, her eyes never leaving the screen as she spoke to the stunned IT team who had gathered behind her. "The encryption is the magician's beautiful assistant. It's meant to draw your eye. The real trick is happening elsewhere." Lines of code scrolled past on the screen, a waterfall of green and black. "He's baiting you. He wants you to throw everything you have at the front door. Every failed attempt to break his encryption sends an alert that likely accelerates the data corruption on the backups. He's making you destroy your own failsafe." David Chen's face went white. "My God, he's right." Then, correcting himself, "She's right." "He is arrogant," Elena continued, her voice a low, intense murmur. "He believes he is the smartest person in any room, digital or otherwise. That means he is watching. He is enjoying the show. We will use that against him." For the next hour, she waged her silent war. She became the weaver again. She didn't just fight the virus, she danced with it. She set digital traps, created false data packets for the hacker to follow, and built complex diagnostic shields. All while her primary focus was on analyzing the very malware that was broadcasting the hacker's voyeuristic feed. She turned the IT team into her own elite unit, snapping out precise commands. "Chen, I need a packet sniffer on this IP range. Now, isolate subnets 3 and 7. They're compromised. Someone get me the original architectural schematic for the backup server's security protocols, the 2.0 version, not 3.0. The men in the room, titans of their respective fields, scrambled to obey the quiet woman in the cleaner's uniform. They were no longer executives and programmers. They were her soldiers. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she stopped. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. The countdown clock on the wall read 0:48:13. "There," she whispered, a grim smile touching her lips for the first time. He got cocky. She pointed to a single, elegant string of code she had isolated on the screen. He used a modified GhostNet rootkit to create his observation portal. It's beautiful work. But he didn't write the original code himself. He stole it from a Chinese MSS playbook from the late 2010s, and he doesn't know its deepest flaw. She had found it, the single, loose thread in her enemy's perfect web. She was in. Now, the real battle could begin, with less than an hour on the clock. The war room at Omnigen had become a capsule of suspended time. The fate of the entire company rested on the quiet woman in the gray uniform. "The flaw in the GhostNet rootkit is a developer's failsafe," Elena explained, her voice a calm, steady anchor in the sea of panic. Her eyes were alight, her focus absolute. "The creator left a backdoor, a kill switch. Koshai found it, and they built a digital wall around it, but they didn't rebuild the foundation. We are not going to break down their wall. We are going to tunnel underneath it. For the next 40 minutes. She worked with a speed and precision that was breathtaking. The keyboard was an extension of her will. She wrote a complex polymorphic script from scratch, a digital key designed to bypass Koshai's defenses by mimicking their own code, and then exploit the original rootkit's hidden vulnerability. It was a high-wire act of incredible daring. A single misplaced semicolon, a single syntactical error, and the entire plan would fail, alerting the hacker and likely triggering a manual override to wipe the servers instantly. The powerful executives and board members stood motionless, their billion-dollar fortunes and brilliant careers completely irrelevant. They were watching a master at the height of her powers, a ghost from another world fighting a battle they could never comprehend. The countdown clock hit 10 minutes. David Chen was sweating profusely, wiping his brow with a trembling hand. 5 minutes. Dr. Hansen was holding her breath, her hands clasped together in a silent prayer. It's ready, Elena said, her voice steady. She took a deep breath, her fingers hovering over the enter key. Activating the script. Now. She pressed the key. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, the skull and serpent symbol on the main screen began to flicker, to distort, as if the image itself were in agony. With a final, silent scream, it shattered into 1,000,000 pixels of green light, vanishing completely. It was replaced by a simple, black command prompt. A single line of text appeared, typed by Elena's steady hands. Decryption process. Initiated. Backup corruption. Neutralized. Access restored. A stunned silence held the room for a beat, and then it erupted. A tidal wave of cheers, of shouted relief, of cathartic. Exhausted sobs washed over the room. Robert Harrington sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands. Dr. Hansen rushed to a terminal, her fingers flying, and then she looked up, tears of joy streaming down her face. "It's here," she cried out. "The data, it's all here, it's intact." Project Chimera was saved. The next afternoon, Elena was summoned to the 50th floor boardroom. The atmosphere was one of quiet awe. Robert Harrington sat at the head of the table. A defeated-looking Mark Jensen stood near the door. Harrington addressed Mark first, his voice cold and final. "Mark, your employment at Omnigen is terminated, effective immediately. Your conduct was not only unprofessional, but your lack of judgment nearly cost this company its existence. Security will escort you from the building." Mark paled, but simply nodded and turned to leave, his career in ruins. Then, Harrington turned to Elena, his expression one of profound, genuine respect. "Dr. Voronina," he began, using the name his security team had uncovered in a frantic, overnight investigation. "I know that is your real name. Omnigen owes you a debt that it can never truly repay, but we would like to try." He slid a contract across the table. "We have created a new position for you, Chief of Cybersecurity. This contract includes a 7-figure salary, a significant stock package, and a blank check to build your own security division from the ground up." Elena looked at the contract, then back at the CEO. "My name is Elena Petrova," she said firmly. "Dr. Voronina is a ghost. I will accept the position, Mr. Harrington, but I have 2 non-negotiable terms." Harrington leaned forward, listening intently. "First," Elena said, "a 25%. Across-the-board pay increase for every janitorial, maintenance, and security staff member in this building, effective immediately. Their benefits will be upgraded to match those of your junior executives. They are the guardians of this company. They will be treated as such." "Done," Harrington said without a moment's hesitation. "Second," she continued, "I want you to establish a continuing education fund for all support staff. If a cleaner wants to take night classes to become a lab tech, or a security guard wants to get a degree in computer science, this company will pay for it." Harrington stared at her, a slow, impressed smile spreading across his face. He had expected her to ask for more money or more power for herself. Instead, she was lifting up the very people everyone else ignored. "Done," he repeated. with even more conviction. "Welcome to the team, Ms. Petrova." 1 month later, Elena Petrova walked through the halls of Omnigen, no longer a ghost. She wore a sharply tailored business suit that radiated a quiet, confident authority. She was on her way to the boardroom to present her first quarterly security briefing. As she passed the janitorial supply closet, a young man, the new night shift cleaner, was just beginning his shift. He saw her and quickly looked down, intimidated by the powerful new executive. Elena stopped. She turned to him and smiled warmly. In her native Russian, she said softly, "Dobry večer, rabotaj usrdno, eto važnoje mesto." Good evening. Work hard. This is an important place. The young man's head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise and gratitude. He smiled back. "I will," he replied in the same language. Elena gave him a respectful nod and continued on her way. She had not forgotten who she was, or where she came from. She was no longer invisible, and she had made it her new mission to ensure that. At Omnigen, no one else would be, either. What an incredible story of hidden talents and earning respect. If you are on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and be sure to subscribe for more amazing stories. Let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from, and don't leave just yet. Your next favorite story is waiting for you right here. Thanks for watching.